For 30 years, the ANC has known how to solve the housing crisis. For 30 years, the ANC has chosen to ignore a proven project that can resolve the housing backlog in 5 years and create industry and sustainable communities in rural and informal settlements. For 30 years, the ANC has obfuscated, sabotaged, lied, rejected with no rational reason, ignored its own act of parliament, blocked funding from the EU and the US, ignored recommendations by the CSIR, ignored its own department's recommendations, ignored academic institutions and big business. For 30 years and 500 billion rand spent, RDP Housing has failed to create self-sustaining communities as the Housing Act mandates government. This is the story of the suppressed blueprint to transform South Africa's rural and informal settlements, the Forward Housing Plan. Greville Wood, a senior car design engineer in the late 1960s, was tasked by Ford Motor Company's senior management in Port Elizabeth to develop an industrial plan aimed at lifting squatter camps out of poverty. It took nearly 15 years until the early 1980s to realize that teaching squatter communities how to manufacture houses and classrooms was the key to providing them with the necessary skills to transform into a general manufacturing industry. Housing served as the catalyst for this transformation.
It took from 1968 to 1983 to realize that there is only one product that you can use to lift squatter camps out of poverty, and that is to teach them how to manufacture houses and classrooms. And through teaching them how to manufacture houses and classrooms, they would learn sufficient skills to transform house factories into general manufacturing factories.
In 1983, Mr. Wood presented this concept to Ford's manufacturing director, the late Neville Cohen. Impressed by the idea of teaching communities to manufacture houses on an assembly line and then transitioning those skills into general manufacturing, Ford collaborated with General Motors and Goodyear to fund a proof factory. This factory would demonstrate how young, unskilled individuals from the Ford squatter camp could be trained on site to produce bondable houses at 30 to 40% less cost than traditional brick-built houses, while complying with national building regulations. The pilot house was transported to Kwadwesi and erected in just half a day, setting a precedent in the housing development sector by reducing construction time from 2 to 3 months to mere hours. The CSIR confirmed that this method fully complied with national building regulations.
I wrote to President Mandela, and he refused to support me. He accepted that it was an American elitist plan that had no further part to play in South Africa. Mr. Tony Leon from the Democratic Party approached me and asked for a description of what we were trying to achieve.
Greville Wood is a remarkable person. What he's really done is he's got together with a lot of former engineers at Ford in the Eastern Cape and put on the table a very, I think, enterprising, relatively low-cost program which would actually teach people skills on the ground where they are, and through a process of distance education and audiovisuality would make a, as it were, instant job creation at the same time as creating housing where people needed it. It was a very interesting program. I actually, after many attempts, I got Greville and myself face to face with Alec Irwin, who expressed a lot of interest in it, and it was treated with a lot of sympathy by government. But somewhere in the bureaucracy between Alec Irwin's office and the department and the people who assess these projects, over 7 years the thing has died, and it's a great pity, and I think we must revive it. It's a great project, and I've been behind it from the beginning.
He said he backed the plan 100% and couldn't understand why Mr. Mandela refused to review it. The presidency cut me out. So that means government rejected Ford, Business Leadership South Africa, Business Unity South Africa, the Engineering Academy, Black Business Council, and other business organizations, and the Banking Association. All were rejected by government.
In 1996, Alan Hirsch at the Department of Trade and Industry appointed sociologist Professor Eddie Webster, who lacked manufacturing experience, to evaluate the Ford housing plan instead of consulting engineers qualified to assess such an industrial proposal. Webster rejected the plan on ideological grounds without technical or commercial justification, and Ford's manufacturing director, Neville Cohen, refuted his claims as technically incorrect and absurd. While a single flawed appointment may not have directly caused South Africa's industrial challenges, this episode reflects a broader pattern. Over 3 decades, decisions by officials lacking technical expertise, often sociologists, economists, or bureaucrats without relevant industrial experience, have collectively undermined the country's industry, causing poverty and unemployment to surge with dire consequences.
In 2010, the European Union offered to provide a couple of million rand for me to put up a recreation of Proof Factory 1 that I did for Ford, GM and Goodyear in 1986. So by 2011, we started on Proof Factory 2.
Imagine 250 housing factories spread across the country. Factories not owned by corporations, but by the very communities they serve, communities in rural areas and informal settlements. Picture these factories producing homes efficiently and sustainably to meet the housing demands of an entire nation. Imagine these 250 factories connected to a central hub, a center of excellence. This center is a powerhouse of knowledge and expertise, akin to a university or business institute, where the best minds in engineering, architecture, accounting, town planning, and legal affairs come together to provide every factory and its owners with access to cutting-edge resources and technical support, ensuring their success and long-term sustainability. Imagine the communities owning these factories having direct access to world-class skills and knowledge, and how this centralized model empowers communities to produce high-quality housing while fostering local innovation and entrepreneurship. Imagine the ripple effect, how these factories will nurture entrepreneurs who branch out to create new industries, driving economic growth in their regions. Imagine these factories evolving over time, advancing to produce multi-story residential units that align with urban planning strategies to combat urban sprawl. Envision a future where these factories not only build homes and other products required by South Africans, but shape cities, sustainable cities designed for growth, efficiency, and community well-being. Imagine the transformation of lives, the pride of communities owning their future, creating jobs and solving housing challenges together. Imagine the possibilities when innovation meets empowerment, when a vision like this becomes reality. Every year since the dawn of democracy in South Africa, approximately 30 years ago, Mr. Wood has engaged with and submitted written proposals to meet with all key players in government, including the Office of the Presidency, the Department of Trade and Industry, and the Department of Human Settlements. However, these departments have consistently rejected the plan without providing any rational reasoning.
In 2021, when Minister Kubai of the Department of Human Settlements announced in Parliament that there were 1.9 million houses unfinished out of a total of just over 3 million, and that it would cost an extra 300 billion to complete. I wrote to her and presented her with the Ford plan. I pointed out that the plan complied with the national building regulations, which she rejected and said, no, it's not a standard construction method, it is an alternative construction method, which it is not. And the CSIR has demonstrated in writing that the Ford plan complies with the timber frame housing specifications. So the minister obviously does not understand the national building regulations. So you can't work with people who cannot understand simple building regulations, and they call themselves ministers.
With this Ford plan, the Gauteng Housing Crisis Committee has on numerous occasions, when we have the opportunity, we present it to government officials. We presented it to the mayor, we presented it to the premier. We've also went as far as to write letters to parliament, making them aware here is a revolutionary solution.
I was tasked to come up with a plan to lift squatter camps out of poverty, to put up an industrial plan. 1986, Ford, General Motors and Goodyear funded me to put up a factory. And I put up a pilot factory that demonstrated we have the technology and the knowledge on how to lift every major shack community out of poverty into the formal economy. And ever since 1994, the South African government have done everything they possibly can do to prevent the plan from happening and keep the people poor. I have petitioned Parliament and demanded that the President, the Minister of Human Settlements, the Minister of Trade and Industry, the Minister of Science and Technology, the CSIR and the Industrial Corporation provide written statements clearly indicating why they have rejected the Ford plan for the last 30 years. The President will probably ignore everything, as he does. But if we can keep together and we can start to mobilize Parliament behind us, I believe we can make some headway.
There is a global shift from traditional building methods to manufacturing homes, driven by a severe housing shortage. In the US, companies like Factory OS build multi-story apartments off-site at 30 to 40% lower cost and much faster than conventional construction, a model gaining traction worldwide. To address its housing crisis and economic imbalances, South Africa needs a comprehensive industrial plan that broadens economic participation and expands the tax base, as envisioned in the 1997 Housing Act, which stressed community involvement and sustainable development. Yet current RDP housing projects rely on tender processes that prioritize contractor profits over community benefits, contradicting the Act's principles. The Ford Housing Plan, created by South African engineers over 30 years ago, offers a promising alternative by promoting community-owned factories and innovative technology to empower low-skilled individuals and stimulate local industries. These manufacturing-based solutions, now central to global housing strategies, need to be adopted in South Africa. failing to embrace them risks importing these technologies at great cost.
To overcome ineffective RDP housing policies and implementation, we need to effectively integrate the Ford Plan into the National Housing Strategy.
Reviving the Ford Housing Plan presents a unique opportunity to solve housing challenges while boosting economic growth and community empowerment.
Invest in our communities, work with us, develop communities.
The ANC government had every chance to transform South Africa but chose not to, reflecting a failure of will, leadership and morality, not resources. The Ford Housing Plan is not a private business deal, but a tested industrial development model used by Ford, General Motors and Goodyear to equip shack communities with skills to build their own homes and grow local industry. This plan aligns directly with the government's constitutional duty to alleviate poverty as mandated by the Housing Act, Bill of Rights and National Development Plan. After 30 years of unjustified rejection, this is no longer political choice, but systemic neglect that deepens poverty instead of addressing it. The problem in South Africa is that we have been using the wrong tool for the job, like chopping wood with a butter knife. The construction industry cannot provide sustainable communities. This is an engineering and industrial problem. Without the Ford Housing Plan, no viable, scalable, or proven industrial solution exists to resolve the crisis facing millions in shack communities. Ford initiated and led this plan. However, when the Department of Trade and Industry made it clear they had no intention of addressing poverty through industry, Ford withdrew after supporting it for over 30 years, refusing to collaborate with a government uninterested in ending poverty.
I received a letter from an official in the DTR to say there is no policy in government that can support the development of an engineering plan to lift shack communities out of poverty. Goodbye.
Even if South Africa were to root out corruption, establish functioning municipalities and re-attract foreign investment, this would only circulate within the first world economy. It would not address the great divide in informal settlements. This is the elephant in the room no one wants to confront. The government's lack of development in informal settlements has weaponized poverty as a tool to maintain political power.
I'm trying to build a space for me at the back by seeing this material. I want to put it here because we cannot stay inside the house, all of us. So I'm organizing this material to put it here to share with my brother.
To address this, South Africa must launch a separate community-based industrial strategy designed specifically to uplift shack settlements and townships. This would create permanent skilled jobs and decent housing at a cost the government can afford. For years, government departments, despite billions in funding, have ignored this plan. Instead of uplifting people, they have chosen to sustain poverty. Why? Because poverty ensures political loyalty. Poverty keeps people desperate, controllable, and dependent. One could argue against many aspects of the plan, including the common but debatable view that South African culture does not support manufacturing. However, this overlooks the challenges that stem more from systemic issues than cultural incompatibility. The real question is, what are the consequences of another 30 years of inaction? Continued neglect would likely deepen economic stagnation, increase unemployment, accelerate deindustrialization, widen inequality, and weaken South Africa's global competitiveness, making recovery far more difficult. This is not ignorance, this is not incompetence, this is policy.
People don't realize how bad the housing crisis is in our communities and in the country. So housing is a big issue in our country. The Gauteng Housing Crisis Committee has also submitted a document to government, all three spheres of government, call it the Emergency Housing Program. And this is what we as communities, 34 communities consented to this emergency housing program in saying, this is our issues, this is the crisis that we face, and this is what government needs to do. They have failed our people. So far, they have failed our people in where we submitted this document to them in saying we have an emergency in this country regarding housing.
Forward with accountability, forward.
To every citizen, leader, tribal king, and member of parliament, we ask one question. How long will you allow this crime against the people to continue?
The time for excuses is over. The Ford plan is a viable plan to lift shack communities out of poverty. The CSIR has verified this numerous times. They have even told Parliament that it will address the job and housing crisis. And for 30 years, the government has rejected its own scientific advisors for no practical reason whatsoever, except to perpetrate poverty, unemployment through their incompetence, stupidity, uselessness, and irresponsibility. There is no reason why we cannot address housing in this country in a practical way that creates industries and lifts communities out of poverty.
Since the days of apartheid, Gravelwood has campaigned tirelessly for the rights of ordinary South Africans to transform their own lives. Drawing inspiration from systems pioneered by Ford, he developed an innovative approach using manufactured housing to reshape the South African landscape. This method remains the only viable and scalable solution to address poverty and unemployment at a national level. Now 84, Wood still lives in Johannesburg and continues his lifelong struggle for social justice.